Hi, Sarah. Hi, Joshua.
Good morning, Karen.
Good morning. Let me turn on. I'm trying to get everything all set up here. Actually, let me pause the bit. Okay, we've started the recording, and welcome to our session on computational thinking and archival studies. I'm Karen Gracy, and I have several of my colleagues here, Richard Marciano, who is in charge of our project. And so I'm just going to very briefly mention everybody, and then Richard's going to take over. So Sarah Buchanan is here, Joshua Kitchens, and I'm just trying to scroll through, make sure I get everybody in, and Michael Kurtz is here. So Richard, go ahead and take it away, and I'm going to mute so you don't have to hear the lawnmower going.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. And go to full screen mode. Can you see my screen? Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, wonderful, because I can't see anyone at this moment. Okay, it's a pleasure to be here today, part of this session. This is actually something we started 2 years ago at an ERIE conference in Liverpool with Sarah and Karen, and Josh joined shortly after that. I just want to acknowledge some of my other colleagues who are part of kind of a core technology network in this project: Mark Conrad, Michael Kurtz, Philip Piety, Greg Jansen, Lanice Williams, Bill Underwood. The core team has strengths in digital archiving, history, learning science, software engineering, visual representation, art history, and computational science. And it's kind of backing our educator network. If I have a URL on this first page, if you want to go and get a little more info and see the actual proposal, and we're building up that page. So let me jump in with a little intro. This project is funded by IMLS. It's a 2-year project. It's actually called Piloting a Collaborative Network for Integrating CT, which is computational thinking, into library and archival education in practice. So I have a few kind of impact bullets here, if you'll bear with me. The main purpose is really to train the next generation of students and professionals to work in increasingly digital and computational environments. The focus is on better preparing library information science students to enter the digital workforce. And also there's a faculty focus on enabling faculty, new faculty of all ranks, to teach courses needed to prepare future digital collection students and practitioners. We have some kind of ambitious goals, and I'll just state them. Modernizing archival and library education, and hopefully we'll have a session at the end where we can chat and be in conversation, and happy to revisit all these with my colleagues, and also contribute to the development of faculty and library digital leaders and moving forward. So our partners, as we indicated, include educator partners. We have an educator network. That's the focus of today's presentation. But we also have what we call a practitioner network. And these are experts from a variety of cultural institutions. We chose very deliberately for this project to focus on diverse and underrepresented American collections of, quote, African-Asian-Puerto Rican American lineage. So these include our wonderful colleagues from Spelman Archives in Atlanta. That's Holly Smith. Densho Digital Archives of Japanese World War II Japanese American camps in Seattle. That's Jeff Froh. A fabulous team on the Ricky Renuncia project, which documents the 2019 Puerto Rican summer protests. That's Marisol Ramos, Joel Blanco Rivera, Yamari Fraticelli Rodriguez, and Eduardo Beltran, located from Puerto Rico to California. and in the middle, and Michigan and Mexico, so a very international team. And finally, the Legacy of Slavery project at the Maryland State Archives. We added a recent project, which is allowing us to focus on artificial intelligence and machine learning as computational methodologies. And this is the FDR Presidential Library and Roosevelt Institute, so-called Morgenthau Holocaust Collections project with Abby Gondek and Kirsten Carter. So the approach in this project, as you will see in the next few slides, is to adopt these so-called Jupyter notebooks, which we'll talk about, for teaching, use in the classroom, developing teaching materials, lesson plans, and articulating computational stories. All right, a little bit about computational archival science and computational thinking before I turn it over to my colleagues. So for the last 5 years, we've been pioneering this space that we're calling archival science with a computational twist, so-called CAS. The focus is on exploring computational treatments of archival and cultural content and trying to figure out what it means and how we can, in a concerted way, bring that into a classroom setting. Computational thinking is something more recent that we've started incorporating. And one of the definitions of computational thinking, it's a form of problem solving that uses modeling, decomposition, pattern recognition, abstraction, algorithm design, and scale. So these are things you don't always hear, right, in an LIS classroom setting, but we're trying to bridge these two worlds. And CT is actually, well, I have a slide on CT, so I'll say a few more words in a second. So here's my busy slide on CAS. We actually have a portal under the AI Collaboratory, which is a virtual organization that we stood up to support this grant. All of us are part of this collaborative. We've had 5 workshops since 2016. I'm sorry, 5 IEEE Big Data workshops since 2016. Over 30 international workshops. There's over 50 papers, presentations, publications. So there's an interesting body of work that's emerging in the computational turn in archival science. I invite you to take a look at this portal. One of the early definitions we had of CAS was the following. It's admittedly a transdisciplinary field concerned with the application of computational methods and resources to large-scale records and archives processing, analysis, storage, long-term preservation, and access, with the aim of improving efficiency, productivity, and precision in support of traditional archival lifecycle activities, such as appraisal, arrangement, description, preservation, and access decisions. Sorry, that's a little bit of a mouthful. What is computational thinking beyond that definition? Well, we've adopted a framework built by David Weintraub, who's a colleague at the University of Maryland High School. And what you see on the right is a taxonomy of computational thinking practices. And it's broken down into 4 verticals. We're going to refer to those shortly. One is data practices. It has things such as collecting data. These are computational activities that you're likely to see in archival projects, digital archival projects. So creating data, manipulating data, analyzing data, visualizing data, etc. Modeling and simulation practices is one of them. Computational problem solving, which includes programming and debugging, and systems thinking, which includes activities like thinking in levels, defining systems, etc. This has been augmented by my colleague Bill Underwood through a series of papers and reflections over the last couple of years. Why are we bringing computational thinking into CAS? This was actually a question Michael Kurtz asked me yesterday, so I thought I would add a few comments. In the era of digital records, computational principles, practices, and methods really need to be better integrated into archival theory. And one example that comes to mind is the OAIS, the Open Archival Information System Reference Model. What it really is a conceptual framework that allows digital archivists and preservation professionals to design a system with by conceptually mapping archival functionality into system components. And the system itself is a virtual system. It's not an implementation. The model can be mapped into a variety of systems or interpreted in terms of software development. That's kind of the philosophy of what we're doing. We're trying to map archival concepts that are used in the classroom and that occur in projects to computational concepts. And that's why we're using this taxonomy, this framework of 4 vertical practices. We want to map in the same way that K through 12 educators have done with computational thinking and STEM activities in the classroom. We want to map computational thinking concepts into archival activities. So it's instead of CT STEM, we're doing a CT library and archival science. That's our focus. I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, and Josh is going to introduce himself and talk about some of his work as part of this project. Josh, do you want me to continue to present the slides, or do you want to take over?
Yeah, Richard, if you just continue to present the slides, that would be great. And thanks, Richard. So I want to talk a little bit about what we've done at Clayton State initially through this project. From our standpoint, traditionally, Clayton State has really had an emphasis on teaching our students various digital skills to work with archival materials. But traditionally, we've couched them more as a archival process versus a computational process. And going through this program with Richard, Karen, Sarah, Michael, and others has kind of allowed us to think through what do we really mean and what are we trying to get students to do as they're thinking through both an archival practice and a computational practice. And one initial sort of standpoint is just the process of appraisal. And we start our students out early in their career at Clayton State, learning different skill sets related to computational activities. So if we think about appraisal as the process where which our students identify and find records of sufficient value to archives, we can start thinking about the different computational activities that would happen to allow a student to recognize and identify digital records of this nature. And on a very sort of early level, what we could do with computational thinking is we can think about different aspects. First and foremost is just programming. Doing simplistic programming allows someone to do a sort of more deeper dive into an appraisal of a digital collection. And so learning how to write a tool or a very simplistic tool that can allow you to do an initial inventory, initial review, find out file sizes, things like that is a really great activity for students to start learning and understanding. In terms of sort of teaching these ideas of programming, there's a lot of tools we can use. We, as the instructors, don't necessarily have to create every single tool. My background is more archives, history. And so I've kind of taught myself a lot of these computational tools and maybe don't have the computer science background to teach it completely effectively, but using tools such as Google Grasshopper or any other tool out there available to teach our students programming is a really great approach. This is sort of doubly emphasized with the use of Jupyter Notebooks. Jupyter Notebooks utilizes Python scripting language, and through the process of getting students used to Jupyter Notebooks, they start learning how to do rudimentary Python programming if you give them certain activities. One of the things I developed was a simple Jupyter Notebook to kind of teach students how to get used to the Jupyter Notebook. And much of the activities they were doing were appraisal activities, like find out how many names with this specific surname, specifically from the Densho data, which most of us were working with in the spring, were in this data set. Simple things like that to do some analysis of it. The other aspect aspect that I think is sort of really valuable, at least from an appraisal standpoint, is choosing an effective tool. When we discuss issues such as digital preservation or just working with digital materials in general, we have to think about what the different tools can do, what their different effects are, how much are they going to cost. And I think the approach to thinking about things computationally really, really can help our students really understand that need to think about the tools they're using. One of the conversations we always have are the differences between open source and paid software and how those different tools affect our workflow as archivists. We like to use the phrasing that open source tools are free as in a puppy, not so much free as in completely free, free as in there's going to be work associated with it. And what does that work, how does that work impact your work going further versus a vendor provided tool that might do similar things. And then also talking about what outputs you get, you know, a simple programming example here, just outputs to a text file that would require more manual investigation to do appraisal, whereas other tools such as things like Droid can generate information about the types of files that exist there. If we talk about environments such as BitCurator as well, generate different types of information for doing appraisal. And thanks, Richard. I'll throw it back over to you to move on to the next slide.
Okay. Sorry, let's give me 1 second. To go back in full screen. Did you want to comment on this?
I don't think I have anything to comment on this one in particular, but this is just gives you an idea of how we can break down computational thinking into archival ideas, whether it be from the CAS, from the Society of American Archivists, or the Academy of Certified Archivists as well. Each of these can give us kind of a concept that relates directly to these computational systems.
All right, thank you. Would this be a good time for you to jump in, Karen?
Sure. I can talk about what my experience were working with students to get them to understand the CT concepts within my own class. That so this past spring, I designed and delivered for the first time a course in digital humanities. And so my students were not exclusively archive students, but there were a goodly portion of the students were archive students. But I also had students who were interested in digital humanities because they essentially want to specialize in that. We actually have a pathway for those students, people who are interested in digital libraries, digital preservation, special collections, academic libraries. So because I was starting from scratch rather than adapting, I actually took those computational thinking areas as kind of inspiration, specifically the data practices activities. And I actually created my syllabus in a way that sort of walked people through. So there was kind of a bit of a linear progression from collecting data through creating data, manipulating data, analyzing data, visualizing data. And it actually was a really nice framework for introducing students to the various concepts, but also doing it in a logical way. They had a large project that they worked on through most of the semester where they got a data set. In this case, it was the Densho data, which I think Richard's going to be telling you more about in a little while. But so this was the data about the Japanese American incarceration during World War II. And so we got a particular chunk of that data, which was the exit data. So when the people were emerging out of the camps at the end of the war, where did they go? And so there were some interesting data points in that set. And so the students, they got the data, they were able to do some cleaning of the data, they were able to use various tools to analyze the data, looking at things like frequencies. Also, they were introduced to geotagging software. And then they had to create some sort of story using either the ArcGIS story maps, or they could also use Omeka, depending on exactly what they wanted to do. And so by the end of that course, they had an introduction to all of these various phases of going from having raw data to actually having some sort of completed exhibit where they could, you know, tell part of this larger story. So some of my students ended up doing things like, so where did they start out at? So actually it's very powerful to see where people started out, you know, when they first came into the camps, where were they all living versus where did they go at the end. So that's just one example of one story. And many of them did not return to where they were living prior to being incarcerated. So, but just to get back to this idea, so it was a very nice way of framing the course in a logical way. We didn't actually create any Jupyter notebooks, but they had an introduction to it so they could see from a high level, you know, how does this work? How can you create, you know, how can you automate various parts of this? So they got a good sense of what can AI do for you versus what is still reliant on humans. So I thought that was a really nice lesson. They also got a lot of introduction to analysis. So even though I didn't map in a very nice, pretty graphic, which that was excellent, Joshua, I like that. You can see that I largely drew from, you know, I did draw from every part of the CT taxonomy, but you know, I think they particularly the data practices and then also systems thinking, looking at, you know, complexities and the patterns in the data, looking at, you know, just sort of breaking things down and then sort of putting things together in a interesting way. I think all of those are relevant here. I don't have it linked here, but I think we all worked on, all of the educators worked on some mapping of, you know, looking at, we looked at the Academy of Certified Archivists knowledge areas. So that's what these are on the left. And then trying to see what the connections were to these various CT activities. And so we have columns that will say things like, so if you were going to look at provenance original order, you know, what sort of information would you need? You know, what activities in a class would you be doing that would relate to that? What information would you need? If you'll let me just for a second, I just wanted to see if I can pull that up for a second. I don't have the sharing on, but there we go. Okay, so if you don't mind me reading aloud for a second. So provenance original order, that's the first knowledge area. The activities that they might engage in would be to analyze or document the origins and custody of objects or records using existing documentation when available and file structures for disk images. And that actually maps to A1 collecting data, D1 investigating complex systems, B1 using computational models to understand a concept. And so what information would you specifically need? Well, you might use accession information, file system data, chain of custody data. There might be prior descriptive tools such as classification schemes, card catalogs, registers. And then the last column, we were listing maybe tools that could be used that are out there. So one tool that came to my mind was Bit Curator, specifically for looking at things like file structures. So that's kind of what our mapping was trying to do. So just to sort of wrap up, I think we all approach this from you got it. Okay, there we go. Excellent. Thank you. We can go back to the slides. And if people want links to those maps, we can provide them. So just let us know in the chat. They're kind of a work in progress. I think that so but that's kind of where we're sort of getting down to, like, you know, how do these connect? And so, you know, for many of us, I think we did these mappings after the fact, after we'd actually taught, trying to wrap our brains around these CT concepts and how they mesh into the various courses. I'm actually going to stop here and let the next person talk, because I think Sarah's got some things to say about arrangement.
Yes, that'll be me. Thank you, Karen, and thank you also for providing us that conceptual mapping. I hope some of the audience members attending today can kind of appreciate a little bit of the range that we've been working on over this past spring semester. And that's where I'll be starting with what I'm talking about today, which is a little bit more of a microscopic view, I would say. I think for reasons of time in the semester and in the pandemic semester, especially, in my teaching, I have covered more of the conceptual concepts that we've talked about in another course. So for example, in my fall course, at the start of this project, we did, of course, spend a little bit more time on these concepts. And that left me with the direction in the spring to really, this is the point in our curriculum and how I've designed our archival studies emphasis at the university. This spring course that I most recently taught is really the point where I want to give my students as much hands-on time experience with processing a collection that is possible. So that is where I'm starting from in talking about our application to arrangement today. Not to say that this is a course exclusively focused on arranging and processing a collection, because it's actually far from it. We try to cover multiple topics related to data ethics, records management, data formats, and especially working with digital data. So there's a wider discussion certainly of curriculum that's ongoing, and I think that's implicit in what I'm talking about today, if not explicit. So with that little bit of background, I would say that some of the work that we covered in the spring semester in my data and records management course, which again is the third of 3. So by this point, I'm expecting my students to be familiar with the concepts that both Joshua and Karen have covered. And I'm expecting them to use and apply those concepts in a hands-on way. So with that in mind, we started in the course this past spring by, again, introducing to my students another chunk of the Densho data set. And that's probably not the right word, because this data set is extraordinarily rich, and we all grew so much in the experiences of working with this data, and especially learning directly from the deputy director of Densho, who was kind enough to guest lecture in my course this past spring, Jeff Froh, who you've heard about already. And what we did based on the information that he shared with us was to work on the experience of the internees. And in the middle of the process, again, Jeff Froh helped us get to know this data set. My students worked in groups of 3, which I felt was quite manageable, and I'd probably keep to that again. This was the second iteration of this course. So by this time, I had definitely had some experience introducing a data set and also really calibrating for my students what I expected them to do. So while Joshua has talked about programming and coding and a little bit more of the technical skills, I provided my students with ample resources out there like OpenRefine, tutorials on OpenRefine to help them dive right in. And so with those tool sets at their disposal, I found that working in groups of 3, they were able to peer mentor each other, help each other fill in certain technical skills gaps that certainly they grew from the beginning to the end. And another part that I hope we'll get to spend some time on is kind of the assessment work that we were able to do. Even over the course of a single semester, I noticed a marked shift in the confidence level of my students from the beginning to the end. And that's really something that I know they're going to take with them into the future. So again, what you're seeing here on the slide is a little bit of the final work of some of my students. They were given a data set. I gave them tools and tutorials to manipulate, to categorize, to label and visualize even some of the data set. And again, I didn't expect, and I won't spend as much time on this, but I did not expect them to work with volumes of data, only as much as they felt they could manage. But that said, some students were quite ambitious and they were able to work with the entire data set. So I wanted them to keep in mind the core concepts that we use in processing and providing access to archival collections, which are provenance and original order. Provenance is a particular area of interest for me. So my students know that, and they also incorporated that into a lot of what you're seeing here. I wanted them to think about, is there any original order that's built into this accession? This was a data set provided to us by Densho, and we understand that it's a collection of items that have arrived at Densho from a variety of original sources. So some students really took to that aspect of this data set and really dove into the provenance aspect. And when we're processing a collection, there are many ways to do so. We can look at chronology. We can try to put a collection into the order of the creator and their life events. There's also more external markers that we can look at, like geography or various other ways that we mark time in the world. So another key concept that we keep in mind is that of what are the principles of arrangement. And you see here, Oliver Wendell Holmes talks about different levels of arrangement. And I asked my students to keep these concepts in mind as they work through the Japanese American data set and connecting it to the storytelling elements that became most possible through our use of Jupyter notebooks, which again is a work in progress. And you see a little bit of the outputs from the work that we did for Jupyter notebooks here in the second picture. We are able to tell more in-depth stories through the students' knowledge of what they're able to discover working in their groups, connect into archival documents, for example, that are available online as we marked the 75th anniversary this past year. Many more documents are becoming available because of that anniversary. And I'll leave it at that point to go back to Richard.
Fabulous. Yeah, I'm really proud of the work that's come out of this pilot network. It's very unusual and rare to coordinate across universities and programs in this fashion. And so so we're going to continue that work in the fall and try to look at opportunities of connecting with this emerging framework. So I just want to end. I have a few slides. It's a little past 10:30. I have a few slides where I want to show you an example of one of these notebooks that we've been discussing to make it a little more concrete. And so if you can bear with me another 10 minutes max, I'll walk you through a few demos and give you an idea of what this Jupyter Notebook framework looks like. And then we should have enough time if for the audience, if you're still online and you're interested in connecting, since we're a small group, would love to chat further and hear about your own experiences or how this project connects or could be extended to incorporate some of your interests. So let me go back in full screen mode. When I do that, everything goes dark. I can't see any faces. We'll try that. Okay, so the particular use case I'm going to walk you through is referenced here. There's a paper, slides, and the actual notebook, interactive notebook that you can run in the cloud off of our platform called Cases, which we'll talk about in the next few slides. The paper, the topic, has to do with personally identifiable information, PII, in prison records in World War II incarceration camp records. So it's called Automating the Detection of PII in Japanese American World War II records. This was one of the first notebooks we put together a couple of years ago. we're using, back to Karen's slides earlier, we decided to look at the Academy of Certified Archivists mapping or topics. There's a document Josh shared with us, RDS, Role Delineation Statement, which identifies 7 sort of meta domains, such as if you look at domain 2, arrangement and description, domain 3, reference and access, so kind of big categories. Inside those domains, there are more precisely defined topics identified as tasks and knowledge statements, which we started using. So what's a Jupyter notebook? Well, it's this file format with infrastructure around it that's gained tremendous momentum over the last few years. Educators have adopted Jupyter notebooks for teaching, classroom use, developing teaching materials, creating computational stories, projects, etc. There are millions of these out there, but primarily in the data science field. Not so much of this has sort of percolated over to LIS programs, and that's one of the reasons why we're looking at this. There's a resource in the top right, which is fantastic, which is a sprint book on how do you teach and learn with Jupyter notebooks. It's full of recipes and ideas. And then our platform, CASIS platform, which stands for Computational Archival Science Educational System, the link is on the bottom left, casis.umd.edu. These notebooks are based on historical notebooks. So there are beautiful examples here from Galileo and Einstein and Lewis and Clark, the Voyages of Cook, etc. The background is paper-based notebooks that represented observations, experiments, ideas, notes, formulas, and data. In the present time, this has evolved into eLab notebooks. So that's this larger context. Our lesson plan architecture and communities of interest are represented in this kind of busy diagram, but we're interested in, at the bottom, in different audiences, in educators contributing notebooks, in the middle, students contributing notebooks. Might come back to that if we have a few minutes. And also practitioners and professionals from cultural institutions producing notebooks. This is happening outside of our project right now and evolving very quickly. So we have a platform to collect and sort of shape these notebooks using our framework into portfolios of notebooks. That's in the top. And right now we're using the cultural institution collections and projects to create a number of themed notebooks based on Densho, Legacy of Slavery, FDR, etc. And the component we're starting to define, it's still work in progress, is what we're calling a lesson plan, which is an introductory layer on top of the notebooks. This is what how this is emerging right now. So if we look at sort of the anatomy of a lesson plan, we're thinking of a lesson plan library that educators could literally pull off the shelf and make use of or adapt to their classes. These lesson plans would reference some of our projects. Those are these modules, and could be adapted into an instructor course plan. And then they would index into some of our case study notebooks, which themselves leverage project data sets in cultural institution collections. We're thinking that the lesson plan itself will be a Jupyter notebook, and we're about to experiment with that over the summer and into the fall. Here's an example of a Jupyter notebook that could point to the Japanese American PII study. In this particular lesson plan, we identify archival topics such as enhancing description and privacy and PII issues for access, with lesson objectives, prerequisites, resources, desired outcomes, etc. So let's jump in and we'll finish with a few slides on the notebook itself. So for the PII Japanese American project, if we go back to the taxonomy of 4 verticals and 22 computational thinking practices, these are the 10 practices that we identified. This was work done with students over the course of a semester 2 years ago. I have all the slides here and you can interact with this. So for the sake of time, and so that we can chat in the next few minutes, I'm not going to go over these slides in great detail, but I'm just going to flip through a few of them to give you a sense of what this represents. So this relates to Tule Lake Camp, which was one of 10 incarceration camps in World War II in Northern California. And we're looking at these objects, these index cards. This is a particular card that references points to a police report of allegedly incarceree participating in a riot. So these are Stasi-like police reports, and there's some 25,000 of these police reports. It's 21 boxes originally at the National Archives, and now they've been digitized, and we've been working on this for a little while. So I'll just take 1 or 2 of these so-called CT activities, and you'll see what that looks like with respect to objects and computational treatments. What would a computational thinking activity of creating data look like? Well, it would be taking the card images, turning them into text through optical character recognition, and extracting metadata for a particular card through NLP, or named entity resolution, recognition, computational linguistic processes. So you would go from the image of the card to a row, say in a spreadsheet like this. That's creating data. By the way, these 2 data sets on top and bottom are the data sets that Karen and Sarah use in their classes, an intake data set and an exit data set for over 120,000 incarcerees in the camps from 42 to 46. Manipulating data could be doing this at scale, looking at thousands of these cards, building them up into these spreadsheets using tools like OpenRefine to then harmonize and create controlled vocabularies and have some consistency in the naming. So those are the kinds of activities we've done. We've analyzed the data, we've visualized these records. And then this is something a little more unusual for LIS students. It's thinking about models, like weather models, predictive models. So we built a model, which was a flow chart, which uses all 3 data sets. And we have sort of a decision tree to figure out if the card is releasable from a PII standpoint. The algorithm that was used here was looking at age and making sure that none of the records referenced minors, which could be considered as juvenile criminal records and could be detrimental to the individuals referenced there even 75 years later. So that's what we looked at. We constructed a pseudo computational model with pseudocode, mapped it into Python through computer programming, developed modular solutions, created abstractions, and did a lot of troubleshooting and debugging. So you can run this entire notebook. It's a notebook of notebooks, and it's on our CASES website. So my last slide, where do we go from here? We would very much like to partner and collaborate with archival educators and colleagues. So we're looking for a few good archivists, and we'd love to expand this pilot network. And last slide is kind of a open mic. We thought this would be a good opportunity to chat. I think we have 15 minutes left. Of how does this register? Is this useful? Do you have any feedback? Would you be interested in further exploring this space with us? So I'll open it up to everyone. Thank you very much. And you're all welcome to unmute yourselves and reveal yourselves. Be happy to chat since we're such a small group and I recognize some of the names here. Also, Karen, Josh, Sarah, feel free to further open the discussion and elaborate if there are themes we didn't have time to cover today.
Oh, this is Karen. I just shared a link to one of my students' projects. Well, we didn't actually use the Jupyter notebook in the final project. We did, essentially follow that data practices model. And so I just wanted to show people what you could, in addition to doing the notebooks, which really shows how the workflow goes and the various rules that can be coded. There's also the, hey, what can you do with this data? How can you tell a story with it too, which I think for the course that I was in, I think a lot of students found that to be really valuable because they want to create something. So, but, in terms of, it's been a really interesting, I guess, how long have we been doing this now? 9 months, something like that. Sort of saying, okay, where do we begin? How do we do this? And, but then just sort of getting our hands dirty and saying, well, let's, see what fits together and where the gaps are. I don't think there's one right way to do this, but we really want to figure out how instructors can mesh these concepts in with courses that they may have been teaching for years. I was unusual in that I was designing a course completely from scratch, but I think Joshua and Sarah were trying to do it with courses that already existed. And it's like, so do you completely rip all the seams out and start over, or are there ways of sort of sneaking this in and making them realize, some of the students are very comfortable with that. If they have any sort of coding background and any sort of background working with data, they're fine with it. Others, you have to find different ways, kind of different metaphors to help them understand the concepts. So, I just sort of took this middle road where I wasn't, making them write code, but making them understand, showing them what is sort of undergirding this. It's like, what allows you to be able to do this in a way that's not completely handcrafted. I mean, part of what the emphasis was for me is, it's great to do these one-off projects, but ultimately you've got to find a way to do this that's more cost-effective and more efficient. And when you're working with large data sets, you've got to start processing this in a way that isn't, because you're never going to get anything done. And it also, I think students working with these, this information on a more atomic level. So they're looking at, for example, the Densho data that you saw example of those cards. It's like, okay, so how do you get access to information, to data on that sort of smaller level, not just looking at the card, but looking at each individual piece of information on that card. And as archivists, we often don't work at that very sort of microscopic level, but we should be. And the only way we're going to do that is by using some sort of automated methods. So I'm kind of rambling, but hopefully I
No, thank you for sharing your insights and experiences. Here's a shout out to Adam. I don't know if you're still there. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Good to see what you all have been doing. Actually, I'll respond to what Karen was just saying. So I appreciate your insight there, Karen. And I'm sort of thinking like, also hearkening back to Richard, one of your slides, you're claiming, or one of the goals of the project is to talk about archival theory and how this sort of stuff connects to that. Okay, so let's talk about archival theory, right? What do we teach students in introductory archival courses? We teach them about processing and among other things, but one of the things we teach them about is processing. I have a sort of, we have an exercise in my introductory course that is a processing assignment. It's not based on digital materials, but it is a processing thing. And one of the things I say to the students is, for the purposes of this exercise, do not do item level description, right? I only give them like 20 documents, 20 records, and I have them sort of create a mini finding aid based on that. But I say, do not touch these at the item level. You will be tempted to, because you want to know all the cool stuff about what's in these materials. But don't, because otherwise we'll never, there's also these things called backlogs or whatever, right? There's a whole set of archival theory and writing about that tension right there. MPLP and other related kinds of concepts, controversial as they may be, I think the more important point here is that we need to make another set of professional decisions about when to go deep, when to penetrate into the item level, and when not to. Digital objects are slightly different in that they are sort of scanned and created at the item level. So otherwise, you don't just scan, you don't have a PDF that's a scan of an entire folder from an archival collection. I guess I'm also rambling here. I just would be interested to hear what people have to say about that. People's response to that. Sarah, I know you mentioned teaching this in what sounded like more straightforward archival, quote unquote traditional archival course. So I'd be interested to hear what that course was and sort of how you plugged this type of a project into it.
I'll take the baton. So I definitely think that in this, and I correct myself, this was the third iteration. So even thinking back to the first iteration, where we did a completely kind of different approach to this, what I really discovered this past spring was that every collection is so different. I mean, my students were approaching this collection in completely different ways than they did in the second time a couple year ago, right before the pandemic. So with this collection from Densho, I did not and could not impose a way for my students to process this collection. And what did I even mean by processing? I did not want them to, fully process this collection for Densho, because that's not really what Densho is going to be using the stories and the data to do. In this case, the work that Densho is engaged in is trying to tell a more complete, and Richard spoke to this more eloquently at the beginning of today, is tell a more complete telling of the experience during World War II in this country. And so I think I couldn't ask my students to process this in any traditional way. In particular, I think my students also got to see that not all collections require a step-by-step process. We could not really impose a processing manual on this at all that you might have seen for an MPLP kind of style of making another kind of collection accessible that I'm thinking of, 5 years ago would have worked really well from the other assignment that we did before this project. So every collection is different. I took away completely different lessons from working this spring with the Densho data set.
If I may add a little.
Sure.
Oh, and we have someone who just materialized. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Richard. So I'm a digital preservation librarian, and I wanted to touch on something that Adam mentioned. And one of the things that I'm seeing in my 10 years of working on digital projects and managing bit streams is this just disassociation with the content, just there's just no connection anymore with these materials that I'm managing. And I wonder, I know when I've early in my career, when I worked as a processing archivist, there was this deep respect for the materials because of the tactile nature of these resources. But now, I'm slinging around megabytes, and it's not clicking that, these are human stories. And I just wonder, how you're addressing that with your students, and and if you have any advice about, just maintaining that connection and maintaining that sense of humanity with this kind of work in the digital realm. I would definitely appreciate that insight.
Yeah, I can just quickly to give my take on that, and then Joshua, maybe you can too. So I think that this goes back to our core principles. So one of the ideas that I do stress in my teaching is provenance. And so I think I try to impart the importance of understanding the origins of this collection. For example, the Densho data set, as I alluded to earlier, is a collection of sources. Not all were created in 2019, but some are 50 years old, some are 30 years old, and some predate the people that they're about. So it's very important that we pay attention to the origins and the sources. And I think in the future, as we start to expand our work as a piloting educator network, and we look, for example, at the FDR and Morgenthau and the Holocaust data sets, we're going to be confronted with those issues on a much larger scale. So I found it very important and meaningful for my students to see that on a scale that they could understand and work with and appreciate. And Adam, you even mentioned giving your students 20 documents. That's certainly a very manageable number, and it allows our students to understand issues of scale. And I can speak more to scale issues in some of the other provenance research that I'm doing right now. But Tammy, that's a great point, because it is so important that we not, impose. Students really crave that. They really want to know, what is the best way to do this? Hasn't this been done before? I just want to learn those best skills. But it's a big shift for them to make, to understand, no, this collection is actually going to require a little bit from column A and a little bit from column B. And we try to do that at an approach that doesn't scare them away. Josh.
Yeah, and I think I'll jump in here too. There's a couple of different ways you could even think about it, just thinking computationally when we are thinking about materials, whether they be digital or digitized materials, is one of the core principles of computational thinking is like thinking about different solutions to a problem. And our problem in this case isn't just rudimentarily sort of computational, it's also sort of this human problem. And I think especially projects that both Karen and Sarah did, where they did some digital visualization work. My students also did some visualization work, actually get at that connection to human element. Now, we may not have like the traditional understanding of hierarchical arrangement all the time, but we still go back to the context of where the collections came from, who created them, who are these people that created them, that sort of human story. There's also a way to get at some of this understanding, even when you're using computational tools to look at materials. I have a random example I let my students work with. That's a thumb drive I had in my first master's degree. And I showed them that there's all this material that's deleted there that you can still access, and it kind of can tell a story about me and the random things I downloaded from the internet in 2008 or other things like that, that kind of can build up that human element that, yes, we're looking at materials, even in a microcosm, we can see these stories. Granted, it gets more complicated as you get in bigger data sets, but still you can start seeing different patterns depending upon the tools you're using for analysis appraisal. Let's say we use like Droid to analyze a disk image, and we can see all the different files that are on that disk image. We're using BitCurator to analyze a disk image and see the different pieces. How many video files do they create? How many text files? And we can start building these stories from that point. But it's a really great question.
Yeah, tree map, different visualizations can really show you thought that the collection was all about this, but actually the tree map shows that it's mostly that.
And Tammy, if I can add just one quick comment, because we're at the top of the hour. So pre-pandemic, we had a kind of a datathon in the fall of 2019 with 5 groups of students on this collection. We ended up we never published anything or revealed anything compromising or shaming, etc. But we actually ended the semester with a public event where we invited survivors and their families who listened to the student presentations and came and met with them and talked about how they were represented. And some people who were at Tule Lake were actually at that event and could see themselves in the data. So we had a very moving and thoughtful experience with people represented in the content and the students themselves. And that was rather extraordinary. We also had a movie producer who came. He had just produced a documentary on insurrection in Tule Lake. So he presented the video, the videography work, and there were discussions, etc. So you're absolutely right. There is a responsibility that comes with the computational dimension of contextualizing this and being even more aware. And in some sense, maybe that's the opportunity if we descend at the item level or go into spaces less archivally traveled, is to have those conversations on the ethics and community implications of the processes themselves.
Thanks so much, everyone.
This is Sebastian. Can I ask a question? I finally could get on audio.
Please.
Hi, Mr. Richard. So I just want to I think I'm probably the only student. I'm not sure in this group. How do we move this into an everyday office environment? The reason I ask is a couple of days ago, I was actually talking to a couple of my office colleagues about. So in my office, we have a really fancy scanner, and no one knew even how to use OCR on it. When I talked about OCR, they looked at me as if I was talking gibberish, and they said "You're nerd, such a nerd," and I'm like, "This is nothing. This is not nerd. This is basic function." And that's when I realized 9 out of 10 people do not even know what OCR is. And then we're sitting on a mountain of data. I'm actually trying to digitize 16 years worth of caseloads. And I don't know if I'll ever succeed finishing it. But I know that's something I'm always interested. I think this is great. I'm learning about Jupyter networks for the first time. But how do we translate all this into your average office environment?
Anybody want to jump in?
Well, this is Karen. Clearly, there's a gap in, even education for practitioners. We're focusing mostly on our graduate students right now, but that has to trickle down into easily accessible, understandable education for so people who are already working in the field. How can they adopt these concepts? And so I think we're sort of right at the beginning of the hard work of figuring out. We're talking about how do we do a lesson plan right now, but that's something that will translate ultimately, whether it be into a workshop that you actually register for, or self-study documents. Maybe eventually this will turn into something that practitioners can work through, some sort of resource that they can work through on their own. That's the only thing I can think of to say about this right now is that there's a lot of work to do to get it to that point. Anybody else want to jump in?
mean, I'll jump in here. I'll kind of say ditto, but also I think the big thing, at least from my perspective, is getting archivists kind of unafraid of technological solutions. Some archivists are very like pro using different forms of solutions to do their work, but sometimes, especially if someone comes from sort of a traditional paper-based background or is thinking more of archives from a traditional paper-based background, they may not have the experience with different technological tools that are available. And I think, at least from what I try to do with my students, is sort of get them used to them, get them comfortable with them, and do sort of smaller scale activities that can demonstrate, okay, we've done this little thing, maybe when I'm in my career, this bigger thing I can do. You know, I did this in school, or I did this for this activity, and I can kind of scaffold on my initial experiences. And I find that developing that sort of kind of lack of fear, because there's a lot of people who might be very online but might not be technologically, you know, astute. They think they're going to mess up computers, and one of the things that I really want to try to teach people is that you're probably not going to mess it up, and it's okay if you do, because usually someone can fix it. And that's a big skill set that's sort of one of those soft skills that I hope that we can try to teach students through this.
John, the collections you're working with are small or large?
Yeah, sorry, you're asking me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I got confused for a second. Well, I work for the federal government. I'm actually at the embassy, U.S. Embassy in Lima. Yes, it's a massive collection. I'm talking about, I don't know, I mean, probably half a truck load of documents. And so, you know, and then I know that the federal government has this digital initiative that we need to go paperless by 2022. And like, I know this, we are nowhere, you know, close to it. So we just recently moved to Lima. And then I was going through my office stuff. I was just like, oh, we have this scanner here. Let's see what it has. And I realized that it actually can scan as in PDFs as OCR. And when I brought it up, people were like, what is OCR? I mean, nobody had absolutely no idea what OCR meant for. And they were like, is that the name of an office? I was just like, no, it's the name of an office. This is what it means. They were like, oh, this is too much work for us. I'm like, you don't have to do anything. You just have to press the button that says OCR option. And that's when I realized, like, nearly no one in the office knew what it even meant. And for me, that was kind of an eye-opening, because like, I'm like, you know, there's so much a single archivist can do. You know, so I mean, like, I'm trying to archive everything in my office, but I don't think I'll ever win the battle.
So I think there's another dimension to this, which we've alluded to, but I just wanted to make a little more explicit. I used to have a lab at the University of Maryland pre-COVID. So we would spend a lot of time working with students. And what you see even in this project, we have a kind of a network of networks. There's 18 people on this IMLS project. All of us have very different backgrounds. The thing we try to teach our students across these projects and collaboratives is to work in teams, and to work and to think in an interdisciplinary manner. And for projects that have really succeeded, so not all do, but for those that have good outcomes, what students the feedback students tend to provide, and when they start developing digital confidence, is that, yes, they really don't have to become programmers. They don't have to become IT people. They have, it's essentially about demystifying technology, which is why our approach of talking about it in the context of a framework of things that are more durable, right, I think makes a difference. But the feedback we get from students on some of these projects is, yes, I've kind of found my archival voice. I can see how I can work with computer scientists, art historians, data scientists, etc. In back to your question, back to your comment, John, not in doing that solo, but in working in networks of students. So there is I think there's a whole sort of learning that needs to be done around how do you work in teams and how do you contribute without having to know everything, which is impossible, completely overwhelming. My background is computer science, and technology is completely overwhelming. And you can't work that way anymore. So all of the work I do, all the projects I'm involved with are with the kinds of networks represented in this project. And I think that's a really important dimension.
I would add too, and I was lucky enough to have Karen as one of my professors when I was in library school. And Karen had mentioned systems thinking early in my career. And I really dug into that with, and I, read Donella Meadows' Thinking in Systems book. And at one point I created a systems map, and Donella uses a clear language for understanding the behavior of a resource, whatever that resource is, and then all of the indicators that are basically evidence of a successful system, and then the interventions that are required to make that system successful. And so as you go about the process of educating your colleagues and working, tapping your colleagues' knowledge and developing your office brain, just keep in mind that, that they're probably very familiar with the idea of maintaining chains of evidence. And so OCR is just one piece of evidence that a machine is creating, and that machines and people can use then to make sense of what would otherwise just be a static image. So, just those big concepts, if you have that motivation to read Donella's book and then integrate that into your thinking, it's very helpful. And thank you, Karen.
You're welcome.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Adam.
And I think at the end of the day, we really want to be better colleagues. We need to work together and learn from one another. This space is huge. It's moving very quickly. There's the digital tempest is just blowing our way all the time. And most of us, when we teach these digital courses or work on projects, I've heard that over and over again, almost have a sense that we're starting from scratch every single time. So what we're really exploring is sort of the, how to overcome the digital archives Groundhog Day. And how do we build reusable components that we can share and leverage? And so it's really about moving knowledge forward and building a knowledge base and going from there. So that's kind of the trajectory we've chosen in this project. Would this be a good place to conclude?
Yeah,
another 15
that
minutes.
sounds like a sort of a final statement on where we are. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for that came today. We only lost a couple, so that's not too bad.
It's fabulous to see old colleagues and new faces, and if there's ways to stay in touch, we should try to do that.
Yeah, and please do, more is going to be coming out on this project. Richard can tell you more. I mean, I guess it's going to be via the collaboratory website.
Yes, we'll try to build the website up. It's there's a minimal information there, and we'll try to share our documents and findings and moving forward. And
I'm sure we'll see everybody again at maybe ARI next year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.